Did you see this coming? Take a quick glance at the Premier League table. Go on, check it. Right up there, rubbing shoulders with Liverpool and Arsenal, sits a name you probably didn't expect. Nottingham Forest. Yeah, you heard that right. The same club that spent 2 decades clawing their way back to the top flight is now holding firm in 3rd place, taking the league by storm. But here's something even crazier. Nottingham Forest was once the undisputed king of European football. Before we get to that legendary story, let's talk about their unbelievable season so far. For Forest fans, this campaign has been nothing short of a dream come to life. Not since Brian Clough's golden era, when they conquered Europe, has the city ground buzzed with this much belief, this much fight, this much ambition. So how did they get here? Let's dive in. 3rd in the Premier League, 6 consecutive victories, a 7-0 demolition of Brighton. These aren't the numbers of a club merely surviving in the top flight. This is a team thriving, hungry, ruthless, and unapologetic in its ambition. Chris Wood has been the hammer leading this charge, 17 goals in the league, carving defenses apart with the precision of a seasoned finisher. But this isn't just a one-man show. Morgan Gibbs-White, Anthony Elanga, and Oral Mangala have all stepped up, turning Forest into a team that refuses to back down no matter the opponent. And they've proven it. Liverpool, Manchester City, Chelsea, all fallen at the city ground. Each game a statement, each victory a reminder that Nottingham Forest are no longer just a historic club living off past glories. They are here, now, writing a new chapter in their story. But no game encapsulated their dominance more than February 1st, 2025. Under the lights of the city ground, Forest produced a performance that will be spoken about for years. 7-0 against Brighton. Chris Wood netted a hat-trick. Elanga added 2, and the home crowd roared as goal after goal hit the back of the net. A statement, a warning. Forest were not just winning, they were overwhelming their opponents. Of course, no season is without its setbacks. A 5-0 thrashing at Bournemouth was a brutal reality check, a reminder that the road to glory is never without its bumps. But the response? That's what defines great teams. And Forest responded with authority, reclaiming their winning ways and marching forward. With an FA Cup run still alive and the EFL Cup providing another avenue for silverware, the question lingers. Could this be the greatest Nottingham Forest season in modern history? The world is watching, and the Forest are making sure they won't be forgotten. Oh, before I forget, check out our membership section. You get some sweet emojis and early access to videos. We also have some exclusive videos you can watch too. Anyway, back to the video. People are already calling Nottingham Forest a one-season wonder, not knowing the fact that the club once ruled Europe. Before we talk about their best seasons, why don't we start with how the club stepped into the footballing world? And after that, we'll take you to a wild ride of their best seasons, followed by 2 decades of agony, despair, and resurrection. All right, let's go back, way back to 1865. No Premier League, no Champions League, just a bunch of men in Nottingham looking for a new sport to play. They weren't thinking about European glory. They weren't even thinking about professional football. But what they started would eventually shake the entire footballing world. It all began with a group of shinny players, shinny being a form of hockey. One night in a pub on Shakespeare Street, they decided to form a football club. They threw in a few shillings each to buy a set of red caps, and just like that, Nottingham Forest was born. That red, it stuck around. To this day, they wear the Garibaldi red, named after an Italian revolutionary. Not a bad choice for a club that would later go on to spark its own footballing revolution. At first, Forest weren't even in the Football League. They played in local competitions, gradually building their reputation. But here's the thing, while the club was growing, so was the sport. In 1888, the Football League was founded, but Forest weren't in the original 12. Instead, they spent years proving they deserved a place among England's best. And in 1892, they got their chance, joining the First Division. 6 years later, in 1898, they won their first ever major trophy, the FA Cup, a 3-1 victory over Derby County at Crystal Palace, and just like that, Nottingham Forest were officially a club to be taken seriously. Now, let's pause for a second. Think about this. Forest had been around for over 30 years before they lifted a trophy. Decades of hard work, of near misses, of players coming and going. That's a long wait, but this club was never about instant success, and believe me, that was just the beginning. From here, Forest would see ups and downs, moments of promise and years of struggle, but their identity, that was already forged. And speaking of defining moments, next we'll talk about the journey that took them from being just another club to one of the most feared teams in Europe, because trust me, you're not ready for what happens next. So, Nottingham Forest had their first taste of glory, the 1898 FA Cup win. But did that launch them into footballing superstardom? Not quite. In fact, the next half-century would be a constant battle to stay relevant. The early 1900s weren't exactly kind. The club bounced between the first and second divisions, never really settling. One season they'd be competing with England's best, the next they'd be scrapping just to get back up. By 1914, football took a back seat as the world plunged into World War I. When the game resumed, Forest weren't in a great place. They lacked consistency. Their squad wasn't strong enough to challenge for titles, and by 1949, they found themselves in the 3rd Division South. But here's where that Forest spirit kicked in. They weren't going to stay down for long. 1951, promotion back to the 2nd Division. A few years later, 1957, back in the 1st Division. And then came a moment that reminded everyone why Nottingham Forest was a name worth remembering: the 1959 FA Cup Final. This was no fluke. Forest had a squad full of fighters, and on May 2nd, 1959, they stepped onto the pitch at Wembley to face Luton Town. They were 2-0 up within 14 minutes, playing with a swagger that hadn't been seen in decades. Even after going down to 10 men, a massive disadvantage in an era with no substitutions, they held on. Forest won 2-1, lifting their second FA Cup. That team, led by Billy Walker, had given Forest fans something to believe in again. They had climbed back to the top, but the real challenge? Staying there. You know this is the era, the one that took them from a club bouncing around the divisions to back-to-back kings of Europe. And it all started in 1975 when a man named Brian Clough walked through the doors at the city ground. When Clough took charge, Forest were not a powerhouse, far from it. They were sitting in the 2nd Division, struggling to make an impact. And Clough, he had no point to prove. Just a year earlier, he'd been sacked after only 44 days in charge of Leeds United. That disaster could have ended his career. Instead, it fueled him. He didn't care about reputation, star players, or what others thought. He demanded total commitment, discipline, and bravery. He once told his players, if God had wanted us to play football in the clouds, he'd have put grass up there. In other words, no long balls, no nonsense, just passing, movement, and control. The transformation wasn't instant, but the signs were there. In 1976-77, Forest finished 3rd in the 2nd Division. That meant promotion to the 1st Division. And this is where the story takes a turn that no one saw coming. Most newly promoted teams fight just to stay up. Forest, they decided to win the whole thing. In their first season back in the top flight, they won the 1st Division title. Let that sink in. A team that was playing 2nd-tier football a year earlier was now the best in England. How? Simple. Clough built a team that was fearless, disciplined, and impossible to break down. He brought in Peter Shilton, one of the best goalkeepers England has ever seen. He signed Kenny Burns, a tough, no-nonsense defender who could also play in midfield. And then there was John Robertson, a winger who looked more like a pub footballer than an elite player. But under Clough, he became a magician. Forest didn't just win, they dominated. They lost only 3 league games all season. And to prove it wasn't a fluke, they also won the League Cup that year, beating Liverpool in a replayed final. Champions of England, first try, but Clough wasn't done, because now Nottingham Forest were heading into the biggest competition in football, the European Cup. At this point, you'd think Forest had peaked, but if there was one thing Clough loved, it was proving people wrong. Their European campaign started with a massive test, Liverpool. Not just any Liverpool, the reigning European champions. Forest were the underdogs, but Clough's team didn't care. A 2-0 win at the City Ground followed by a 0-0 draw at Anfield, and Liverpool were gone. From there, Forest marched on. They took down AEK Athens, Grasshopper Zurich, and Cologne, setting up a final against Malmo and Munich. The stage was set. Could a club that was playing in the 2nd Division just 3 years earlier really win the European Cup? You bet they could. Trevor Francis, Forest's record signing and Britain's first £1 million player, scored the only goal of the game. Forest won 1-0 and became the champions of Europe. Unbelievable, maybe, but they weren't finished. No English club had ever retained the European Cup. Liverpool won it in 1977, but they lost their title the next year. Clough's Forest were determined to go one better. This time, their journey took them past Oster, Dynamo Berlin, Ajax, and Hamburg. The final? A showdown with Hamburg in Madrid. Hamburg were favorites. They had Kevin Keegan, one of the best players in the world. But Clough had a team that didn't care about reputations and once again now won 2 European Cups in a row. This wasn't just success. This was a fairy tale, a miracle, the greatest underdog story football has ever seen. What made Forest so good? Clough's philosophy was simple: defend as a unit. His team conceded only 24 goals in their title-winning season, passed the ball, no long balls. The result? A club that had no business being among Europe's elite had just beaten the biggest names in football twice. And yet, if you think that was the end of the story, if you think Forest just stayed at the top forever, you're in for a shock, because what goes up must come down. And unfortunately, Nottingham Forest were about to fall hard. If the 1970s were Nottingham Forest's greatest era, the 1980s and 90s were a slow, painful decline. Imagine standing at the peak of a mountain only to watch the ground crumble beneath your feet. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need to talk about the slow unraveling of Brian Clough's empire. After lifting their second European Cup in 1980, Forest were still a force to be reckoned with. They added another League Cup in 1980, proving they weren't done winning. But something had changed. For one, Clough's right-hand man Peter Taylor left the club in 1982. Taylor wasn't just an assistant. He was the man who spotted talent, built squads, and kept Clough grounded. With him gone, Forest's transfer business suffered. Then came the departures. Key players from the golden era, Trevor Francis, John McGovern, Kenny Burns, Martin O'Neill, either left or faded. Replacing them? Not so easy. Forest weren't in free fall just yet, but the cracks were showing. Now, if you want a moment that truly marked the end of Forest European dominance, it was the 1984 UEFA Cup semi-final. They faced Anderlecht, and after a tight first leg won 2-0 by Forest, they lost the return leg 3-0 in Belgium. A tough loss? Sure, but what if I told you the match was fixed? Years later, it was revealed that Anderlecht had bribed the referee. Yes, actually paid him to make sure Forest lost. Imagine that. A club that had fought its way to the top was now being cheated out of Europe. From that moment on, Forest would never reach another European final. While the early 80s were tough, Clough still had some fight left in him. He rebuilt Forest into a solid first division side, capable of competing but never quite reaching their former heights. They won the League Cup in 1989 and 1990, beating Luton Town and Oldham Athletic. They even reached the 1991 FA Cup final but lost to Tottenham. But here's the thing, Forest were no longer a title-winning side. They were a good team, not a great one. And Clough, he was starting to lose his touch. By the early 90s, football was changing. The Premier League was about to be born, bringing new money, new tactics, and new pressures. And in 1992-93, after 18 years in charge, it all came crashing down. Forest started the first ever Premier League season with hope, but it quickly became a nightmare. They won just 10 games all season, finishing bottom of the table. And on May 1st, 1993, after 18 years, Brian Clough walked away from Nottingham Forest. His final game? A 2-1 defeat to Sheffield United, confirming their relegation. As he walked off the pitch, fans chanted his name. Some cried, others applauded. This was the end of an era, the greatest era in Nottingham Forest's history. Clough had taken them from the second division to European glory, but now, as he left, they were heading back down again. Forest wouldn't stay down for long. Under Frank Clark, they bounced back to the Premier League in 1994, finishing an incredible third in 1995, their highest finish since Clough's glory days. But it didn't last. By 1997, they were relegated again. In 1998, they bounced back under David Bassett. But just 1 year later, in 1999, they were relegated again. This time, it wasn't just a bad season. It felt permanent. A club, once had ruled Europe, had now become a yo-yo team, constantly bouncing between divisions. From 1993 to 1999, Forest were relegated 3 times. The magic was well and truly gone. Why did it all go wrong? So how did Nottingham Forest go from European champions to a struggling club in just 20 years? The loss of key players, Peter Taylor's departure, and of course, football changed. And just like that, the golden age was over. But the story doesn't end there, because after years of pain, Forest would rise again. And if you think their Premier League return was special, wait till you hear what happened next. Nottingham Forest's golden era was over. For over 2 decades, they wandered through the wilderness, searching for a way back to the top flight. So how did Forest, a club with 2 European Cups, spend so long outside the Premier League? And more importantly, how did they finally fight their way back? After their 1999 relegation from the Premier League, most fans thought Forest would bounce back quickly. After all, they had done it before, but something was different this time. Their return to the Football League, now the Championship, was rocky. The club was bleeding money, their squad wasn't strong enough, and managerial instability became a major problem. Between 1999 and 2005, Forest went through 6 different managers. None could bring consistency. None could restore the club's identity. Then came the unthinkable. In 2005, Nottingham Forest were relegated to League One, the 3rd tier of English football. This was rock bottom. Forest, European champions in 1979 and 1980, were now playing against teams that had never even reached the top flight. They were no longer seen as giants. They were just another struggling club. For 3 years, Forest fought to escape League One. They suffered heartbreak in the 2007 playoffs, losing to Yeovil after throwing away a 2-0 first leg lead. But finally in 2008, under manager Colin Calderwood, they secured automatic promotion back to the Championship. Wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't easy, but Forest were back in the 2nd tier. The problem? The Premier League was still a long, long way off. If you were a Forest fan during this period, you know how frustrating it was. So close, yet so far, over and over again. Under Billy Davies, they came closest, reaching the Championship playoffs twice. In 2010, they finished 3rd, but lost in the semi-finals to Blackpool. Next year, another playoff failure, this time against Swansea. After Davies left, the club spiraled again. Managers came and went: Steve McLaren, Sean O'Driscoll, Alex McLeish, Stuart Pearce, Dougie Friedman, Philippe Montagnier, Mark Warburton. Some lasted a year, some lasted months. The club had no stability, no clear direction. To make matters worse, off-the-pitch issues became a serious problem. Forest were hit with a transfer embargo in 2014 due to breaching financial fair play rules. Owner Fawaz Al-Hassawi ran the club in a chaotic fashion, making rash managerial decisions and failing to provide long-term vision. By 2017, Forest were fighting relegation to League One again. They survived on the final day of the season thanks to a 3-0 win over Ipswich Town, but the writing was on the wall. This club was broken. For years, fans dreamed of a return to the Premier League, and every year, those dreams were crushed until one man changed everything. By the time Steve Cooper arrived in September 2021, Forest were a club in crisis. They were bottom of the Championship after 6 defeats in their first 7 games. It looked like another season of failure. But Cooper didn't just turn things around, he performed a miracle. His first move changed the mentality. He made Forest believe again. The players bought into his system, his ideas, and his confidence. The results? Incredible. Forest climbed from 24th to the playoffs, finishing 4th. They were the most informed team in the league, playing exciting, attacking football. Suddenly, belief was back. The fans were alive again. In the playoff semifinals, they took down Sheffield United in a dramatic penalty shootout. Then came Wembley, where Forest faced Huddersfield in the final. 1 game, 1 chance to end 23 years of hurt. And they did it. A 1-0 victory, thanks to a Levi Colwill own goal, sent Nottingham Forest back to the Premier League. After 23 years, countless failures, and near misses, they were back where they belong. The sleeping giant had finally awakened. What's next for Nottingham Forest? Getting back to the Premier League was one thing. Staying there is another battle entirely. Forest's return in 2022-23 saw them spend heavily, over £150 million on new players, a record for a newly promoted side. They brought in stars like Morgan Gibbs-White, Taiwo Awoniyi, and Nico Williams. But could they survive in the modern Premier League? Could they hold their own against England's giants? Well, that's a story still being written, but one thing's for sure, Nottingham Forest are back and the journey has only just begun. Nottingham Forest had finally clawed their way back to the Premier League after 23 years in exile. Modern Premier League football was a different world from what Forest had left behind in 1999. The league was richer, faster, and more ruthless than ever. Could a club that had spent decades wandering the lower leagues suddenly compete against billion-pound giants like Manchester City, Liverpool, and Chelsea? Forest's approach to survival? Spend big, really big. Under owner Evangelos Marinakis, Forest launched an unprecedented spending spree, bringing in over 30 new players across 2 transfer windows. Names like Morgan Gibbs-White, Taiwo Awoniyi, Jesse Lingard, and Renan Lodi arrived at City Ground. On paper, it was a bold strategy. In reality, it was chaotic. With an almost entirely new squad, Forest struggled to find chemistry early on. By October 2022, they were bottom of the table again. The dream of Premier League survival was slipping away fast. But just like he had done in the Championship, Steve Cooper refused to give up. Despite the pressure, Marinakis stuck with him. The board believed in his ability to turn things around, and slowly, results started to come. The turning point? A 1-0 win over Liverpool in October, with Taiwo Awoniyi scoring the winner. The City Ground erupted. It felt like a moment of defiance, proof that Forest could fight. By April, they were still in danger, but something changed. With key wins over Brighton and Southampton, they clawed their way out of the bottom 3. Then came the game that sealed survival, a 1-0 win over Arsenal in May 2023 thanks to a goal from Awoniyi. The final whistle blew, and Forest had done it. After a 23-year wait, they weren't going back down. If the first season was about survival, the second was about stability. Forest continued spending, bringing in even more new faces, including Anthony Elanga, Ibrahim Sagare, and Callum Hudson-Odoi. But things weren't as smooth as before. The chaotic squad building was starting to show cracks. By December 2023, results had dipped again, and Cooper, despite his legendary status, was under fire. Then, the inevitable happened. On December 19, 2023, Forest sacked Steve Cooper. It was a moment of heartbreak for fans. The man who had rescued the club from oblivion and brought them back to the top flight was gone. His replacement? Nuno Espirito Santo. Could he be the man to take Forest beyond just another relegation scrap? Could they finally shake off the tag of a club just happy to survive? Well, his first season didn't exactly scream progress. Forest finished 17th with just 32 points, a miserable campaign by all accounts. But hey, survival is survival. They lived to fight another day. And fight they did, because what happened next, nobody saw it coming. This season, Nottingham Forest aren't just avoiding relegation, they're rewriting history. 14 wins in 24 matches, 47 points on the board, just 9 behind Liverpool. The best start to a campaign in decades. But the question looms, can they keep this up? Can they finish strong and clinch a Champions League spot? From 17th last season to a title contender? If they pull this off, it won't just be a great season, it'll be one of the greatest comebacks English football has ever seen. And who knows, if they keep this pace, maybe, just maybe, they'll push the title race all the way. But in a league as ruthless as the Premier League, nothing is guaranteed. Will they finally become a stable Premier League side, or will they slip back into the chaos of the past? Whatever happens, one thing is clear. Nottingham Forest's story is far from over. Nottingham Forest's story isn't just about trophies, promotions, or relegations. It's about defying expectations, rising from the ashes, and proving that football is more than just money and power. So, what makes Nottingham Forest so special? Think about it. Only a handful of English clubs have won the European Cup, now the Champions League. Man United, Liverpool, Chelsea, Aston Villa, and Nottingham Forest. Not just once, but twice, back to back. That will never change. You can talk about money, modern football, and how the game has evolved, But history is history. Clubs like Paris Saint-Germain, Arsenal, and Manchester City, despite their billions, have never lifted that trophy. Forest did it with heart, tactical genius, and a manager who dared to dream. The City Ground isn't the biggest stadium in England, but it's one of the most electrifying. When Forest played Liverpool in 2022, Klopp said, "It felt like the whole stadium wanted to get us. It was an incredible atmosphere." Whether it was Klopp's revolution, the dark days in League One, or their fight for survival in the Premier League, this club has never lost its identity. Nottingham Forest are back in the Premier League. But will they ever reach the heights of Klopp's era again? Realistically, the modern game makes it nearly impossible for a club like Forest to challenge for the biggest trophies. So, what's next? Mid-table stability? A push for Europe? Another miracle? Whatever happens, one thing is certain. Nottingham Forest's story is far from over. What do you think? Where do you see Forest in the next 10 years? Let us know in the comments. And if you love football history, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the game's greatest stories.